Well, good day. I guess I could sound a little Australian if I'd said it right, but I didn't. It's Thursday and it's noon, so this must be Coffee with Ralph. And thank you for tuning in. Listen, earlier this week, I decided I was going to share a call that I had, well, a number of calls I had with a client. And I thought I should title this session, "Are you going to be the bystander or the captain of your care?" But first, I got to put an ad in there. coffeewithralph.com is a free 15-minute call with me. It's about whatever retirement subjects you want to plug in there. And if you go to medicarewithralph.com, you'll find a link to my calendar and we can talk about Medicare, which it's coming that time. And by the way, if you're 65, it's really important we talk about it now. The Inflation Reduction Act has caused some changes that are going to be effective this next year. But there comes a time when the question's asked, well, who are you and why is this phone call so important? My mission has been on this podcast, well, and for most of my career, to bring awareness and really get people thinking about planning for their care, especially with us, the sandwich generation. My goodness, we've got kids at home, and even if they're not at home, we still have kids, right? And so we're helping our kids, and now we're helping our parents. And in some cases, our parents are helping their parents. So now we've got a real triple-decker sandwich going on with no cheese, just lettuce, right? The issue here isn't getting care, but who's at the helm of that care? As I said, are you going to be the bystander or the captain? Power of attorney documents are great, and they're billed as who's going to speak for you when you can't speak for yourself. You know what I mean? What's going to be done with my assets, and my money, and who's going to make medical decisions for me? But that's not enough, and we're finding that out as time goes. But the situation is, well, let me share that conversation with you. I recently had it with an aging client who broke down in tears during our conversation. And that's just not him. He's a very strong, proud man. I can't relay the whole conversation, nor can I use the real names, but I can tell you that his comment to me said it all. He says, after my stroke, and I wrote this down because I thought, man, he said, I felt like a bystander in my own life. That crushed me, man. That hurt my heart. Here's a very proud man reduced to feeling like he's just the passenger in the car and not the driver. Has no say in his own care or his own life. And that's pretty sad. It took me a bit to get into this conversation with him. I realized he'd had a stroke when his slurred speech and slow response times let me know, I've been at this for 20 years. So I've seen many cases of strokes, and I understood. So I understood that he'd had a stroke. He tried to tell me what happened. And, he's been my client for 20 years, and we've discussed nearly everything that could possibly be important to him. I was there to help him when his wife passed. We've become friends. So when he called me out of the blue, I wasn't surprised to hear from him. But I didn't expect to hear that. I expected to hear that he'd had his first great-grandchild. Or maybe that he was fulfilling his midlife crisis and getting that 28-foot boat that he had, or that he wants, ready for salmon fishing. Which, I might add, he named after the wife that died. He named her Alice. So his wife's name. And the joke there is that Alice never wanted him to have the boat. So he figured if he ever got the boat, it would be after she passed away, and he'd have to name it Alice. So when he called, I just wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for the slurred speech and the labored decisions. But like I said, being around this industry long enough, I knew what was going on. And I allowed him time to process his thoughts, something a lot of people don't do. They expect after a stroke that you're just going to respond the way you normally respond, which is not the case. You know, for what seemed like hours, I know it was only about 10 minutes. Stan told me, that's his name. That's the name I'm going to use. It's not his real name. How embarrassed he was at not being able to do the things for himself and how he was being treated like a nuisance, a bother, he said. I listened and I grieved with him for the loss of his independence and his dignity. So his call to me was not a waste of time. Remember, we've discussed just about everything that was important to him. His independence and his dignity was incredibly important to him. He wasn't sure why he called, which is normal. You know, after a stroke, we're a little confused sometimes. But he knew he needed to call me, and he was right. You see, we had developed a plan of care for him, and it was in a file in his drawer called Important Documents. I had a copy on my computer as well, and I asked if his son Andrew was there so I could talk to him, but I was told he wasn't. I told Stan I'd call him back in a few minutes. I was going to try to get a hold of Andrew. And Andrew lived about an hour away and was the person that Stan had appointed as his advocate in case he ever needed care. So you see, nothing was happening the way Stan wanted it. I called Andrew and I left a message, and he returned my call within minutes. As I was talking to his father, Andrew called. You see, I'd met Andrew during one of our annual meetings, so Andrew knew me as his dad's financial man. We spoke for about 5 minutes, just long enough for me to tell him that his dad actually put him in charge of his care and that the document with his wishes was in his dad's important document file in the bottom left file drawer of his desk. That was last week. The other day I spoke with Stan and I actually heard him laugh. You see, Andrew is the youngest and the oldest thought he should take charge. Can you imagine the look on their faces when Andrew pulled this document and began telling them what his dad wanted? Stan laughed loudly, and then he told me it was the most fun he'd had since the stroke. I appreciated Andrew stepping up and possibly causing some family issues, but doing what was right by his dad and what his dad wanted. I want to thank Stan for remembering what I've told him years ago. Don't ever think you're bothered calling me. Call me anytime and let's talk. You see, the story isn't over. It's just the beginning for Stan and Andrew and the rest of the family as they help Stan maintain his independence and his dignity until he passes. And my part in the story isn't over either. I continue to help Stan with his finances and now making sure his long-term care planning, including his insurance, does what it needs to do. You know, I'm sure I'm probably short on time today. It's just that this phone call and this story, I could go in depth on and tell you about Stan and tell you about his family and tell you about his daughter-in-law who figured she was going to be the caregiver here because she was a CNA, and how the older son figured he had financial wherewithal because he's the oldest. I can tell you all that, but I can tell you in the document, that's not how it was going to work. The most frugal and the most attuned to his dad was the youngest, Andrew. And so his dad kind of put him in as the overseer. So if he says he gets care from the daughter-in-law, then that's who's going to help him with the care. I don't think that's what's going to happen. Don't know. It's only been a week, but I know right now that his daughter-in-law isn't at the house with him all the time now. Like I say, I'm sure I'm not using up all my time today, and that's okay. Because I've got to get ready for this new season coming up on Medicare and all the changes that are coming about. And there are a bunch. There's a bunch. So again, coffeewithralph.com is a free 15-minute call with me. If you have subjects that you like me to speak on or dig into for you, give me a call. My number can be found online, or email me at ralph@fireproofmg.com, or hey, jump on coffeewithralph.com for that 15-minute call, and we'll talk about it, and maybe I'll do an episode on it. But remember, Medicare.com or MedicareWithRalph.com is a free 30-minute call, because it takes a little bit of time to get through Medicare. Here's hoping that Stan and you all have a blessed week. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week.